We are studying the chapter titled Concentration in Sri Aurobindo's Synthesis of Yoga. In the portion we have come to, Sri Aurobindo is redefining the terms concentration and samadhi from a richer and a more profound sense. And in what we saw last time, he describes how the divine manifestation takes place in a state of a gathered concentration in which the entire one indivisible divine consciousness turns itself to manifest. And there is what we may call a concentration, but it is a tapas, the divine dwelling gathered in itself for purpose of manifesting, maintaining and withdrawing the whole movement of the divine manifestation. And our experience of concentration is only a tiny part of that, an image of the divine tapas. And in our experience, because our concentration takes place in a consciousness which is mental, it is the mind that has to gather itself and focus on the idea. The divine tapas does not have a narrowed, exclusive focus of concentration. It is the whole divinity, indivisible, so there is no need to narrow itself. It is in any case one. But in the indivisibility, it is also infinitely rich in all potential. And so there is a single movement of gathering, concentrating, and then moving to manifest. In the experience of the manifestation, there is this sense of separateness, of many different things, many forces, many events unfolding in space and time. Mind is an experience that's taking place within this divided consciousness, And therefore, for mind to concentrate, it has to take one thing, put its single force on that one thing, and cut off everything else. And by doing this, the mind is able to break through its own limitation, and through that single pointed focus, attain to an identification with what it wants, gain knowledge, acquire an object, or attain to a state of consciousness, whatever it is. But we see now the role of mental concentration in this larger grand image of the divine tapas, which is something much vaster, complete, and indivisible. Now, the relationship is important because it is through this that the mind is going to be able to enter in direct experience of that. So mind begins with what it can. It proceeds by the idea. Using thought, form, and name as keys, which yield up to the concentrating mind the truth that lies concealed behind all thought, form, and name. This is the portion we had seen last time. And so, by dwelling on that thought, form, or name, the mind is able to enter into the idea. And then the idea itself is a representation of something which is outside and beyond mind in the divine creative tapas. And so it breaks through that eventually and either touches that beyond, rises beyond the mind itself, or at the level of the idea, it receives something of that higher potential and attains to whatever knowledge, gain, or change of consciousness that it seeks. So, he says in the last sentence we saw, by concentration upon the idea, the mental existence which at present we are breaks open the barrier of our mentality and arrives at the state of consciousness, the state of being, the state of power of conscious being, and bliss of conscious being, to which the idea corresponds, and of which it is the symbol, movement, and rhythm. Concentration by the idea is then only a means, a key to open us to the superconscient planes of our existence. So this is where we were. And although we have seen this text in a first exploration, it's worth dwelling on a few important suggestions here in what Sri Aurobindo says. We see here three different gradations. There is this level which is above the idea, of which the idea is a symbol, movement, and rhythm. So we have to explore these three things of the idea. And then in order to get to the idea itself, we have a token, a key, which is thought, form, and name. So the full picture you see now involves three levels. Mind as it is now needs either thought or form or name to hold to something. So if we say, concentrate on the divine. What is divine? I don't know. God. Okay. You mean, and then I give a name which I'm familiar with. So I have to reduce it to a name. Or, you mean that deity and I have an image. Or, you mean the truth, the delight, the joy, the love, whatever it is that the thought has turned to as an idea. But all of these are accessible to thought because they are all fragments, pieces, forms, limited therefore. But if you say just divine, there's no form, there's no name. In its pure conception, it is formless, infinite, and the mind is unable to grasp. So at the first level, the mind needs something to grasp, and this Sri Aurobindo calls a key: thought, form, or name. So we repeat a name, a sacred name, a word of power, or a chant, or behind that name, we may have an idea of our relationship with the divine. So let's take a few examples. You may take the name, as in the case of Valmiki. He was a dacoit, and having committed so many murders, he could not even say the name of Rama. So he was asked to say Mara, and that he could say. It means the very opposite. It means killing, death. So repeating Mara, 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 unknown to him, the word became Rama, Rama, Rama. And so through that chant, through that mantra, his consciousness changed. Eventually he had a series of experiences, realizations, etc. But the name here, if you see, and especially in the way it is used, even the meaning was not important. Innate to the name is a power, even though you spoke it with the reversal of the two syllables. In repeating it, the power was as if activated. And the person is not even conscious of anything beyond that. He is only concentrating on the name. And all the rest, being behind the name, eventually extends its influence in and changes you. The other example would be of a thought. So we take the sacred chant of Soham. So Soham is not a name, it is a thought. He am I. Sah Aham. And the two joined, because Sah and Aham are still two different terms, the words join and it becomes Soham. And there's a link which forms in the idea, he am I am he. And as I repeat the idea, Soham, Soham, my mind dwells on that idea, he am I. Of course, it's not me, not the ego person. And so there's automatically kind of a separation, not this, but what it is that I am, which is he. Where is he in me? Where am I in him? And as the mind dwells on that thought, gradually there is a coming together, a contact, and the rest follows. Or a form, an image of deity, someone you adore, someone you love, someone who in the very imaging moves your heart, calls to your deepest aspiration, touches your inner being. And you dwell on that form. And so through that concentration on the form, again, the process begins. But in all three keys, as we have grasped at something finite, and as the contact deepens, the concentration deepens, there is an increasing influence of that which is behind the idea. And Sri Aurobindo puts capital I, not just a mental formed idea, but something which is already at a height, which is bridging the mind with something higher. So, concentrating the mind on the keys yields the truth that lies concealed behind all thought, form, and name. And he's suggesting here that any name you take, any form, any thought, there is something behind it. And the thing behind it also has a character of a truth, meaning it exists by itself. It is not dependent on anything else. A name, for example, may change according to the language you speak, according to the pronunciation, etc., according to ages. Form can change. Someone has an experience, a vision of a divine presence, but then he looks at a commonly drawn picture and says, oh, but this is not matching what I experienced. Which is more important, of course, what you experienced, because that's what you saw directly. This is someone's representation, perhaps even imaginative. But there is something behind the form which is self-existent. Even you didn't know it. When you saw it, you knew what it was. Similarly, behind every thought, Mother discusses how you can think with words at the lowest level of the sense mind. You can stand back and think with thoughts. But behind thought, there is an idea. Behind the idea, there is a concept. And you have degrees of abstraction, of which thought is a special representation. So in any thought you take, there is always something behind holding something more essential, more true. And as you go up the levels, it becomes self-existent. No more dependent on specific forms, specific articulations or circumstances. So as you go higher up, you are touching what is more true, and true in the sense that it depends on nothing else, it is self-existent. So the truth that lies concealed behind all thought, form and name. For it is through the idea that the mental being rises beyond all expression to that which is expressed. So again we come to an important idea that whenever you express something, there is a gap between the expression itself and the thing which you hold, which you intended to express. You say something, and as soon as you have said it, a part of your mind tracks what you have spoken, and you suddenly realize it doesn't make sense, or it's not exactly matching with what you wanted to say. Having said it, you say, wait, let me correct that. What I meant was, and you make a correction. Or you have said it, it creates a misunderstanding, there's a conflict, confusion, which forces you now to review. What did you mean? You step back, and you realize that what you intended was not what was spoken, or at least what was not what was understood. And so you re-articulate. But there's a gap between the expression and that which is expressed. And so the mind has to start with something which it can hold in the expression, but through that it rises to that which is expressed. To that of which the idea itself is only the instrument. So the moment we say something, the thing which is expressed and the expression, how far up will you go? What is the originating thing which is the source? At this point, the discussion parallels very strongly our study on the Sunday, where we were discussing the word, the divine creative word. And there is this same idea that you can express things on various levels, even within the same language. There are many levels at which you can articulate things. And as you go up the levels, it is more essential, more true, more lasting, more self-evident, self-existent, less open to misunderstanding. But as long as it is in the domain of mind, it is also less precise, at least less precise in terms of form. So you will see when people start arguing, you can say any statement. The other person will counter the statement with one example where the statement is not valid. And you can always find anything like that. So immediately the first person has to move up one level of abstraction. If the arguments become really bad, someone is being unnecessarily picky, you move up still higher level of abstraction. At some point you say something which is so general that it stands by itself and nobody can contest it. But it's also pretty much useless. How do you apply it? The moment you speak of application in this situation, you have to again narrow to something specific, which can be questioned. So in the domain of mind, at least, as you go up, things become more general, less specific, but also more true inherently. Of course, there is a consciousness above mind, where the reverse is true. In the supramental consciousness, which is above mind, as you go up higher, it is not only more true, but very precise. As you come down into specifics, you're reducing, you're limiting, you're distorting, and therefore it becomes less true, but also less precise. What was said there from a supramental consciousness, which sees the whole, can say something with a precise impact on all things. But when you come down to a consciousness which sees only pieces, it's too general. It's not specific enough. So there's a completely different experience from the top. We will touch upon that later in the next paragraph when Sri Aurobindo discusses it. But this is useful to prepare ourselves for what will come. The way the mind works and the way the supermind works are completely opposed to each other. And the basic difference, the basic reason for this difference is mind operates in pieces, in fragments of finiteness. Supermind operates in totalities, unities, not divisions. But we leave that aside for now. We just look at what is happening. That which is expressed, that of which the idea is only an instrument. So there's something above idea which we are now aiming at, and concentration on the idea breaks open the barrier of our mentality and arrives at the state of consciousness of that. So the mentality itself, which is the consciousness we are living in, has this inherent limitation that it can only operate in pieces. But also that it cannot get to something which is a state of consciousness, state of being, state of power of conscious being and bliss of conscious being belonging to the divine. And so there's a point where it has to break through mind and touch this thing in itself, of which mind only makes representations. It may happen momentarily, it may happen on the borderline where briefly something of our consciousness touches that, and that is enough. That is enough to fill the whole being with a conviction, with a deep power. And he describes 4 facets of what is touched: state of consciousness, state of being, state of power of conscious being, and bliss of conscious being. And you will notice one or more of these are always involved in any deep inspiration which allows you to go beyond the norm. One day you wake up and for no reason at all, you're inspired to do something. And the energy of the inspiration pushes you, leads you, and you follow, and everything happens very smoothly, spontaneously, and the work is done. There are other days where you think out, this is what I'm going to do. You plan it out very well, but as you move into action, things tend to break. Things come up which are surprises, oppositions, accidents, unexpected problems, and you find yourself struggling to make even basic steps forward. And the difference is the source, the origination of the impulse and the action. When it is constructed by the mind, it is operating within the limitations of the mind. But when it is inspired from something above mind, it brings with it these things. First, there's a state of consciousness. I'm making a general statement because these are things which have infinite variations, but the general statement will help us to catch what is important here. First, there's a state of consciousness, and you will notice that the state of consciousness is as if above and free from the action itself. When there is this kind of inspiration, you're doing the action, but a part of you is as if free, floating. And when things happen, you say, oh, it is so smooth, it's so spontaneous. You are not embedded, you're not lost in the energy of the action. Some part of you remains always above and free. And this is the state of consciousness. And then there is state of being. The doer, who am I who's doing? And very often you will find when this happens, you don't feel I am doing it. It's rather, it is happening. I happen to be present, observing or enjoying, or I happen to be present only as incidental, like a focal point for something else to act, a support, a point d'appui, as you say in French, a point of support for the lever. When you have a lever, the point of support does nothing. It's the lever which does the stuff. It can lift huge amounts of weight. The point of support is still necessary for the lever to be able to act in this place. If this point of support doesn't offer itself, lever can go somewhere else and use a different point of support. The point of support in itself is not doing anything, but it offers the occasion for something else, the force, the divine inspiration or force or light, power to act. And it does it. I happen to be present. And when the work is done, someone says, oh, congratulations. You say, well, you know what? I didn't do much. I just happened to be there. It was done for me. So this is the second idea, the state of being of our consciousness. And then the state of power of conscious being. So not only wherever there's consciousness, there is a certain power of consciousness, especially when it is in the domain of action. The consciousness is turned to expressing something. Something seen, known, felt in a conviction, this has to be done or this will be done. And then there's a power of that moving to act. And this is the power of conscious being. Where is it coming from? And it rests on both of the previous things. The state of consciousness and the being behind. And so we say conscious being and the power of that. And finally, there is the bliss of conscious being. As the thing unfolds, in the human experience at least, we don't have the bliss, but the joy, the delight, the thrill of the whole thing happening, at least finally when it is fulfilled, you turn and say, oh, this is such a wonderful thing. The joy that fills you even in the action. Sometimes it may even be that you know this action is doomed to fail because that's how it is. The situation is not yet ready, and yet it has to be done because there are consequences later. So even though you know that this action is not going to necessarily work, or you don't even know that it will work, it may fail, you still have the delight of the action itself because it is true, because it brings something of the divine possibilities. It opens the way for something greater in the larger scheme of things. So these are the things, the four facets of the experience when something above mind works. So I've made a very general statement. This would apply for something very simple, like a child who, by the power of his concentration and conviction felt through concentration, now does a movement of gymnastics, which he has never done before. And led by this inspiration, the touch of something higher, which knows what it wants, what it is, he does it smoothly. And of course, the whole experience is filled with a delight. I'll share with you an incident which is unusual. This was long after I had completed my formal studies in the school. And we have an option after that, whether we join in formal competitions. And so I tried to keep the minimum of a few things as a way of keeping contact with the physical education activities. And during the athletics competitions, I chose to apply for the discus throw. And I must have been maybe 24 or something like that. And I went a few days to practice, and I, of course, had to exercise the body a little bit, throw hard, and it went a certain distance. Based on my performance, I was put in the 3rd division. And so on the day of the competition, we have 3 chances. So I did the first time my best effort, the second time my best effort, and it went pretty good. So I was happy with it. And the 3rd time I said, well, okay, now that I've done something which is sufficiently good, I can afford to experiment. So I said, now I will not make any personal effort and just enjoy it in what would be spontaneously attuned to a different state. So I put myself into a different state of attunement, forgot myself, immersing in the remembrance of the mother's presence, and then just let the body move. And as the body began to move, I knew, even as the first movement started, I knew what would happen. And exactly that happened. The body moved in a way which is the smoothest I have ever done effortlessly, perfectly, even it felt as if internally, if one saw it from outside, it would be a beautiful movement, harmonious, smooth, everything perfectly in relation with everything else. And I felt no push, no effort or strain of muscle, but the discus thrown went so far that it went into the category of the first division. And the coaches were very upset because they thought I had done it deliberately to get a prize. And I was surprised, of course, that I was capable of throwing so far with no pressure, no resistance at all of the muscles. And it was such a joy. It was like a dance, a movement spontaneously expressing something. Unfortunately, I didn't go again because I felt that it created some misunderstanding of intentions. But what happened there was something like this. In a very simple material physical action, when the consciousness is able to attune itself to an inspiration and the inspiration flows and carries, the action has these characteristics. So, although this description is aimed at an experience of the self, which is what the whole concentration here is aiming to realize, it is true of all experiences of life because all experiences are fragments, partial experiences of the self. So the principle itself applies in everything. And it could be even in this most ordinary, simple gesture of scooping food to place on your plate, or opening the tap to wash your hands, or calling out to somebody. Even the most ordinary movement can have something of this. And it has all these four facets which are felt in it. Of course, this could now be turned to something more special in terms of intentions. A scientist studying to solve a problem, to have a breakthrough of insight or of accomplishment of a difficulty. Again, the same thing would happen. The mind concentrates, gathers itself on that, and then something of the consciousness breaks through beyond the limits of the mind, touches something slightly above, and suddenly there's a flash, a revelation, aha, I've got it. And at that point, there is a state of consciousness, state of being, state of power of conscious being, and bliss of conscious being, however diluted, however reflected in terms of the consciousness which is registering. And the joy, the delight of that discovery, that overcoming, that insight is really a reflection of this bliss of conscious being. Now, if the same principle is turned to higher and higher purposes, we aim to experience a state of consciousness of the higher mind, let us say, of the illumined mind, of the glimpse of the intuition. And in this concentration, the mind actually touches, experiences those things, and something even more complete of these four facets is had. Or we concentrate on the realization of the self, of the divine in its totality, and we have these four facets of the self again experienced. So he says, by concentration upon the idea, the mental existence which at present we are breaks open the barrier of our mentality and arrives at the state of consciousness, state of being, state of power of conscious being, and bliss of conscious being, to which the idea corresponds and of which it is the symbol, movement, and rhythm. So corresponding to that, corresponding to the idea is that consciousness, or that consciousness is represented through this idea. But he uses three words to describe this relationship. The idea is symbol, movement, and rhythm of that to which the idea corresponds. These three words are looking at this relationship from three different directions. But in fact, all three are simultaneous. So when we approach it from a certain perspective, looking from down up, the idea is a symbol of something which is beyond the mind's capacity to conceive, to hold. So something infinite, look at it this way, the self above being infinite and yet one, with infinite potential. All of that infinite potential is held simultaneously in the same one self. How do I distinguish one from the other? I cannot, from the mind. So the mind captures this aspect of the self as this idea, that aspect of the self as this idea, the other aspect of the self as this idea. So what we have done, something which is simultaneous, infinite, one, is reduced to finite representations, symbols. If you take an analogy, a building, let's take the ashram building. If I have to hold in my mind an image of that building, an experience of that building, let's say, you'll see the mind automatically reduces it. If I say, well, think of the ashram main building, I'm choosing that because it's known to all of us. Immediately in your mind, there's one picture. You're seeing it from a certain angle, which is familiar to you perhaps. Perhaps the main gate, perhaps a particular corner, from the post office side or from some other corner. But each one of us may have a different picture. None of us probably sees it from the top in the satellite view. And yet we can today. We have the tools. You can go on a computer and through Google Maps, you can see it from the top. None of us probably sees it from below. From within the earth, if you look up to the building, none of us would even imagine that we can imagine. And yet the building is not completely seen unless it is seen from all possible viewpoints. Now the full experience of building is the sum total of all possible and infinity of viewpoints. That's what holds the totality of building experience. Mind cannot do that. And therefore it picks one angle, that's good enough. But through the gateway of that one picture seen from that one angle, I hold the whole experience of I access the whole experience of the building. But when I access it one piece at a time. But the building itself is beyond the conception of the mind in its imaging, which is a reduced picture, an entry point. Similarly, again taking an analogy, you use a token. You go to you're visiting, let's say, Akshardham temple. You're not allowed to take bags, mobile phones, etc. inside. So you go and place all these things in a box, and the person gives you a token which you keep in your pocket. Now the token is representing all the objects which you have put in the tray. Each person has a separate token. Each person gets to that tray, belongs to him. But if you look at the building where all the trays are there with all the objects in it, in there, all of them, that's the totality here, totality of the universe, of which I access this piece and all those objects through this one token. And so if you put all the tokens together, collectively they all point to that huge mass. They don't hold it in themselves, but they point to that huge mass of infinite possibilities which are held in the self. So what the mind is which I didn't have through these simple representations. This is what we are doing all the time in language, mathematics, in most so-called creative activities. We are tapping into experiences process, a transition from there to here. And it does not stop with the idea, it continues beyond, down the levels of mind. So there's a whole movement which the idea represents. You see, the idea is like the lens you place against the sunlight. The sun is beaming light everywhere. But that particular stream which the lens is capturing and then focusing is now highlighted. But where did it start? There's this whole passage of movement coming all the way from the sun and through the lens, further continuing. And so each idea, although it catches something of the whole, represents an arrow but a movement. So symbol, movement, and then the third character of it is rhythm. When something is inherently one, indivisible, eternal, and moves into domain and infinite, and moves into domain of multiplicity, division, limited time, limited space, finiteness, it cannot be completely represented, or it cannot be represented at all, I will say, unless it expresses itself in some kind of infinite or eternity within finiteness. Unless it continues to hide its infinity behind the appearance of finiteness. You cannot really reduce and cut up something which is indivisible. So what happens in practice is you will see that the flower is an expression of a certain aspect, a certain experience of the self. But in this flower itself, there is a movement, a bud, blooming, falling. And then what happens? Because the force behind is coming from something eternal. The force is permanent. Now it is operating in time. What happens next? This breaks down, becomes dust, is reabsorbed by the roots, comes back into the tree, and becomes the tissue for something else. Another leaf, another flower eventually. Not only that, the power behind which flower represents, itself being holding infinite potential, is not limited to expressing through this flower, it appears in so many flowers everywhere. So in the same tree, there is an infinity of, there are a dozen flowers, let's say. But each of those represents a slight variation of that infinite possibility. Across the whole range of trees, you come closer to that infinity. Across time, across the centuries, across the millennia, and all the variations, you're coming closer to the completeness of that flowerness of self, which takes this particular form and that variation and so on. So you'll find inevitably when something which is space, beyond space and time, enters domain of space and time, it acts everywhere. But not at the same time. It puts variations, and then there are rhythms inevitably. Inevitably, there are rhythms of its movement, repeating, but each time varying, never repeating exactly. You sit before the ocean for a few minutes and watch the waves. On a certain level, they're all the same. But when you look at particularities, each is distinct. No two waves are ever the same. But now in your mind, if you consider all the waves right now on all the shores of the earth, how many billions of them would be there? Each is unique, but not only unique at this moment, unique in time. In all of the billions of years of the earth's existence, no two waves have ever been the same and will never be the same in future. And now extend this to the whole universe. Everywhere where there's water playing against rock and a wave, no two waves are ever the same in the infinity of the universe and in the eternity of the universe. But when you put all those waves together, you're holding the idea of wave as the self choosing to manifest the idea of wave in space and time. And that is closer to the completeness of the infinite potential of the wave idea of the self. So if you start thinking in this way, you realize immediately every idea captures something of the infinity and eternity of the self, but reduces it to some specific turn of form, generally, of which specific name, form, thought are further specifications. But as you move upward, all these are held together in the oneness of that single idea, the pure idea of the self, the real idea, the creative idea of the supermind. All possible wave experiences are held in that single wave idea. And so the same with the flower, with the animals, with the species of animals, with everything that exists in the universe in this way. But you see here, the idea is a symbol, but also a movement, and in the movement, a rhythm. So I read the same sentence again, and you see, so much is held in this. By concentration upon the idea, the mental existence which at present we are breaks open the barrier of our mentality and arrives at the state of consciousness, state of being, state of power of conscious being, and bliss of conscious being, to which the idea corresponds, and of which it is the symbol, movement, and rhythm. And so you see how important the power of concentration is. Concentration by the idea is then only a means, a key to open to us the superconscient planes of our existence. So what's really happening? Every time we have a breakthrough as a result of a concentration, we are briefly touching something which is outside the domain of our mind experience. And that something entering now represented and articulating itself through the idea and other forms is what we are focused on. But when we concentrate and go back and make this breakthrough, we find the power of concentration is the means, the key to open to that where all this is held, which later we are unfolding and developing and playing on. If we could get hold of that directly, even perhaps develop the capacity to live in that constantly. So he says, a certain self-gathered state of our whole existence lifted into that superconscious truth, unity and infinity of self-aware, self-blissful existence is the aim and culmination. So it's the aim of this concentration eventually and the culmination of this concentration. Now we may pause here and review why. I'm very happy with my life. I'm happy to keep my whole attention focused only on the mind, only on my emotions, and only on my sensations. That stuff up there doesn't interest me. And yes, that's a legitimate choice one makes. But inevitably, after a while, this, which I'm so used to, becomes not so interesting. After all, it's repetitive. How much can you do beyond a point? I need to make it interesting. And what do I need to do to make it interesting? I need novelty. I need change and variation. All right, so here are 20 different vegetables. You want change and variation? All right, we will mix them in different proportions, different combinations. Oh yeah, that's good enough to begin with. But a year down, I've had all those variations. Now I'm bored of this. I need something basically new. It's not enough if you throw in another vegetable, 21 vegetables, 22. It's not interesting. I need something so novel that I've never had an experience before. And at that point, you find the existing combinations and permutations of existing things is not enough. You need to tap into something outside this to bring in something new, which was not there before. Because why do I get bored? Because there's no growth taking place. I need something new which involves a change in my experience, in my consciousness. And so I turn to this new creativity, new possibility. You look at any field of human life, is always this attempt to go a step further, to bring down something new which was not there before. And those who do that are the leaders of the human experience. If you reduce it to financial terms, they're the ones who make the money. They created a new software, a new concept, a new possibility of using the same materials which was not thought of before, a new fashion, a new design, a new application, a way of arranging clothes or doing things. And each time that something like that happens, the person is looked upon as an extraordinary person. We see them as leaders of the human evolution because they reached out and brought something from there. But there it was always. It was waiting. All the infinite possibilities are waiting. So now coming back to our personal experience, we may choose to say, no, I just want this, I'm happy with it. But eventually, and when we say eventually, it may even be not in this life, but in the next, or the one after, or the one after, having done it all a million times, let's say, I will say at some point, okay, now I need something more useful, more meaningful. And then there is this turn up. Because in the domain of mind where you're handling finites, obviously there's a limit. You need to touch something of the infinite potential and draw from there for the newness, if nothing else for your growth. So eventually one has to make that step in any case. And what happens when you turn up at that point? Concentration by the idea is a means, a key to open to us the superconscient planes of our existence. And the idea is all that stuff up there is already ours. It's just that we have somehow shut ourselves off from that. We are only conscious of this range. We are not conscious of that range, but it is there. Even secretly, it is working behind the scenes and I'm not conscious of it. Every time I have an idea. Where did that idea come from? It dropped in from that level. And it brought with it the joy, the delight, the progress, the breakthrough which I needed. But why did it come? Because the last few days I have been wondering how to solve this problem, how to overcome this difficulty, and I was not getting solutions. I went to sleep. During my sleep, my conscious mind was shut and I was open to things above. And it popped in. And when I woke up, I had the solution. Oh yeah, this is the way to do it. Or sometimes it popped in and it had not yet come to the surface. I'm not yet conscious of it. During the day, it pops out, although it had dropped in earlier. But all solutions, all insights are coming from this domain already. But there's a veil, a layer separating our current range of awareness from that. Therefore, that, he says, is superconscious. Superconscient planes, but of our existence, because there is still a continuity of who we are into those domains. And then when we concentrate in this way, we use this key of concentration as a means to break through to the superconscient planes. A certain self-gathered state of our whole existence lifted into that superconscient is the aim and culmination. The moment you concentrate, this is where we are getting to, ends the culmination when we get there. Now, of course, rather than simply solving a problem, we are taking the larger goal of our purpose here. We want to realize that by knowing which, we know everything. We want to acquire that by acquiring which, we acquire everything. We want to become that by becoming which, we are everything. Remember, this was the goal earlier. And this is, of course, the spiritual goal of the yoga of knowledge. And so, when we concentrate now in this way towards that consciousness in itself, to the self, then the whole of our existence in that concentration is lifted into that superconscient truth, unity, and infinity of self-aware, self-blissful existence. So the words he has described here, 5 terms: truth, unity, infinity, and then of self-aware and self-blissful existence. First of all, that consciousness is aware, its awareness is blissful. Our experiencing of it is the experiencing of the truth of that awareness and bliss, the unity of that awareness and bliss, and the infinity of that awareness and bliss. But that awareness and bliss is our existence. It is what we call the Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. But we experience it in terms as a truth, as a unity, as an infinity. So what do we mean by that? Experiencing the truth of it. It happens in our life very often. We have heard a certain proverb or a saying. Somebody keeps, maybe grandparents have told us since our childhood, you know, what is important finally is not what others say, but what you find valuable. Some basic moral or value or proverb. You've heard it many times and you say, yes, yes, I understand. And then something happens in your life, an event, where suddenly a shift takes place and you say, now I realize the truth of what I had always been told. And it's important to observe what is it that happened there when you say you realize the truth of it. Earlier you understood it as an idea. After this experience, it's a part of me. I am one with it. I am the truth of this, the experience of this. Now I've really understood it. And the character of that now I've understood feeling is that I will never again lose it. The idea of it is painted on me. It's like a coating applied, an idea which I have attached to my mind, which influences my thoughts, but they are not my thoughts. But when I experience it in this way, when I become the thing itself, and I am this, all my thoughts will be molded not as an influence, but out of the substance of this experience. So when, for example, we experience freedom, an awakening, a change of consciousness, and we are in it, we are it, we know we will never again lose it. We are different as a person. But the character of this identification experience is that this is self-existent. It is not something I have to think about, to know, or to remember. So somebody says, remember, be careful about this, watch out for that. Yes, I have to remember. And of course I forget. I'm sorry I forgot. You had warned me. But once it is the truth of it that you have experienced, you have become one with it, there's no question of remembering it. Because it is the very substance of your consciousness. And it is self-existent. So the truth of this consciousness, which is self-aware, self-blissful, existence. Then unity of the self-aware, self-blissful existence. In the human experience, because we are operating through the filter of mind, everything is cut into pieces. In order to understand this, I must break it into parts. But having broken the parts, let's say I'm going for a training program to understand how a car works. So the first thing the trainer does is, this is engine, this is wheel, this is axle, this is battery. All the pieces. But if you put all the pieces in chaos, spread out on the workshop floor, I don't have car. Car is not pieces. Car is not even assembling pieces. Car is a unique, special relationship of those pieces, where the pieces are secondary. It is the relationship which is held. That is car. Now the battery could be put on the left side, it could be put on the right side, it could be put on the back. The engine could be in front or it could be at the back. Its physical location is not important. The car would still be car. It's the relationship of engine to the wheel, relationship of battery to car, which is not bound to space. You could rearrange in space as long as they hold the relationship. So you can have many variations of car. It would still be car. So carness of car is the thing which my mind is getting to, but the way I get to it in the normal training program, here are all the pieces. But I have not got car yet. Until the pieces are put together in the right relation. And then in my mind, I'm beginning to feel the truth of those relationships, and at some point suddenly it clicks in and I have it all as a whole. Now I know car. I can take any car and I know how to repair it, I know how to fix it. Having absorbed the essence of through one gateway. So the mind necessarily, because it works in the domain of pieces, has to cut up into pieces, then bring the pieces together, and while bringing it together, it has to kind of break through to something behind, which catches the thing itself, the idea behind. So in the approach to the highest, you try to get to that which is behind, and transcending the limitation of the mind, which is to handle pieces. You know it only when you have the unity of it. It is not pieces joined together. It is oneness, indivisible, of which pieces are representation. I could even design a car where I eliminate the battery. It would still be car. The function of the battery would be handled in a different way. So the carness is something which is complete, inherently indivisible, of which the pieces can be special representations. So in this way, when we go up, as we go up, there's a kind of a breaking out of the boundary of consciousness that divides into a consciousness which holds the unity. And it is only when you have the consciousness of unity that you have the thing in itself. And if this is true of something so simple, it is true much more as we move into the experience of the self, of the divine consciousness. So there's the truth, the unity of that self-aware, self-blissful existence. And finally, there is the infinity of it, because the true freedom from the limitations of the mind is when you have a consciousness which is not finite, which is not bound to operate in pieces. It is one in its infinity. And so this is the breakthrough that takes place as we concentrate on realizing that, lifted into that superconscient truth, unity and infinity of self-aware, self-blissful existence. And this is the aim, and this is the culmination of the concentration. When you get to that, and that is the meaning we shall give to the term samadhi. So remember earlier we saw the conventional understanding of the word samadhi was that you're completely lost in some state and not aware of the universe anymore. So I've gone into meditation. I'm so deeply engaged that I do not feel my body anymore. I do not register any of the sensory sounds. Somebody comes and gives me a knock. I do not even know it. Someone shakes me and says, wake up, are you sleeping? I'm completely unaware. I'm so lost in that absorption, and that is called samadhi normally. Ramana Maharshi, even before he took up any conscious sadhana, used to go into sleep, which was so deep in his teenage that sometimes the boys would come to try to wake him up and he wouldn't wake up. And then at some point, the activity of trying to wake him up became more and more aggressive. They would slap his face, he's still not waking up. When somebody beats him up, still not waking up. They would drag him out of bed, beat him up, put him back on the bed. He's not woken up. But eventually, when he wakes up, he finds his body full of bruises because they've beaten him up. But the depth of the sleep was so profound that there was complete disconnection. He was actually going into deep samadhi in what we would have normally gone into as a normal sleep. In a way, our sleep state is an in-between state. We are lost to the world outside. We're living in an inner domain of consciousness, seeing things of that world. We call them dreams. But the link to the surface is still sufficiently present that if there's a loud noise outside, or some discomfort, an ant biting, or a shock of contact, we are pulled out and we wake up, what we call wake up. But actually, it was still consciousness on a deeper level, disconnected from physical senses, coming back now to physical senses. And of course, there are differences of memory, differences of quality of perception, and so on. But samadhi was, in the conventional definition, a point where you lose completely all awareness of the senses and the world. But now Sri Aurobindo takes the definition of samadhi and broadens it. It is immersion in this truth, unity, and infinity of self-aware, self-blissful existence. And you notice, in this self-aware, self-blissful existence, we have not defined it in terms of withdrawal from the world. It is only a shift of consciousness to something which is currently to us superconscious. But in principle, one could be in that state with eyes open, with awareness of the senses also. It is the state of consciousness which should be superconscient, the one who is registering things of the senses which should be superconscient. So there is no fundamental conflict with the world in this broadened concept of samadhi. It is not an exclusive withdrawal into one state. It is a shift of state of consciousness which can exist whether in world or in other domains. So, and that is the meaning we shall give to the term samadhi. Now he elaborates on this idea that this samadhi would be samadhi even if we were to shift through these different domains of consciousness. So there are broadly three domains of consciousness which are described as the three statuses of Brahman: the waking, the dream, and the sleep. So the waking is this where we experience things objectively, but where all the senses are bound to the physical body. Turn your attention inwards, disengage from the physical biology, sensory organs. You still have senses, as when you daydream. I am daydreaming, perhaps with eyes open. In a boring class, my mind goes somewhere else. What am I seeing? Not what is in front of me physically, but what is in my imagination. I remember the time that I spent in the mountains. I'm looking at the scene of the valley, the trees, the clouds. I hear the birds. I feel the stillness of that space. I feel the cool grass. All five senses are now engaged in that. Somebody comes, I don't even notice he has passed. If my disconnection is sufficient, I may even have a conversation. Somebody calls out to me and says, lunch is ready. And I say, yes, I'm coming, but I'm still immersed in my daydream. And after 10 minutes, again the person calls, aren't you coming for lunch? Yes, I'm coming. And then afterwards, when I come out of that daydream, The person says, why are you taking so long? Well, I just realized it's lunch, but you answered me twice. I don't remember. Take it a little further in. You may have a response on the surface or no response at all. You may be snoring, eyes open or closed. The person will say, oh, today you didn't meditate, you were sleeping. No, I was not. I was fully conscious. But I heard you snoring. I'm not aware of that. So my attention was so indrawn into this inner domain that the body went as if by habit into some kind of a sleep-like state. It was even snoring. But my senses being there, I didn't hear my own snoring. But I was aware, and I'm conscious that I'm aware. And this is the inner domain. And this is where we tend to go in when we are dreaming at night in any case. So it's called also the dream state. But it corresponds to all the inner worlds which are not physical, the vital, mental, and infinite ranges within them. And that is the Brahman in dream state. And if you withdraw even out of that, to that point where Ramana Maharshi used to go, the thread linking the surface dream state to waking state, even that is gone. And you are in some essential state of infinity, eternity, and essential causal ideas, real ideas as Sri Aurobindo calls them, not formed in limited terms, not bound to a particular space or time, and in a consciousness which is still indivisible in a oneness. And immersed in that would be the so-called sleep state of Brahman, because it is in that state that all things are conceived of in their essentiality before they are pushed out into manifestation in specific form. Now, we could be in any one of these three statuses and still be in this term of truth, unity, and infinity of a self-aware, self-blissful existence. And we could be in any of these three. So the samadhi would not bind us only to one status, but would allow us to range through all these three degrees or gradations of Brahman, statuses of Brahman. And this is what Sri Aurobindo now describes. Not merely a state withdrawn from all consciousness of the outward, withdrawn even from all consciousness of the inward into that which exists beyond both, whether as seed of both or transcendent even of their seed state, but a settled existence in the one and infinite, united and identified with it. And this status to remain, whether we abide in the waking condition in which we are conscious of the forms of things, or we withdraw into the inward activity which dwells in the play of principles of things, the play of their names and typal forms, or we soar to the condition of static inwardness, where we arrive at the principles themselves, and at the principle of all principles, the seed of name and form. For the soul that has arrived at the essential samadhi and is settled in it, samadhistha, in the sense of the Gita attaches to the word, has that which is fundamental to all experience and cannot fall from it by any experience, however distracting to one who has not yet ascended the summit. It can embrace all in the scope of its being without being bound by any, or deluded, or limited. So this will be the definition of samadhi that we are now aiming to attain. And you can see this samadhi allows you to be fully involved in the world's activities on the surface of the physical senses, in the objective world as we call it, or fully active in the subjective world, or fully active even in that indrawn, creative, static freedom, or on all three simultaneously and still be effective. And whatever the condition of circumstances we have to deal with, we would not lose that poise, because this is something which is so essential that everything is seen a part of it. And we would not make the error of being bound to any one particular state or experience or extreme. We would not make the error of being deluded, that is to believe this to be that, to be confused by appearances, or to be limited, to be bound to finitenesses. We would be always having this completeness of the oneness and its infinity on all these stations. This is the status in which Sri Aurobindo and the mother lived. And the nature of this samadhi being such, they could operate fully on all these levels at any given time. They had also the freedom to shift focus to any one of them for a specific reason. So there's an example where the mother speaks, she writes to somebody saying, right now, it was during the Second World War, I'm very busy, I have to meet many hundreds of people. And this person says, he writes to Sri Aurobindo, Mother said hundreds of people. How is it Mother says that? Because we don't have hundreds of people going to meet her. The ashram was still relatively small. And Sri Aurobindo explains that Mother is not just meeting people physically, she is also meeting people on the subtle levels. There are descriptions in the agenda where the mother speaks of how somebody who had passed away came to meet her along with one of his relatives, hiding behind that person. So the relative is coming, mother is dealing with this person on the physical level, but on the inner level, she is dealing with this other person who has come with him and interacting with him at the same time. And there are two completely different interactions with two completely different individuals on different levels of domains of consciousness at the same time. If you think about it, for us to attempt something like that would be so difficult, because I can't even do that with two human beings sitting in front of me. Imagine having two conversations at the same time with two people. It would be mighty confusing, because the mind consciousness can only focus on one thing at a time and switch between one and the other. But that consciousness holds it all in a single vision, and it's one concentration that involves all these variations. So there is no need to switch. You're operating in one effort at the same time. It's just the station of the consciousness having shifted makes all the difference. So this also Sri Aurobindo elaborates in the next paragraph, that the mind is compelled to concentrate on one thing at a time, and a single idea, single subject, single object. Even in action, it must focus on one thing at the same time, and it is diffused in the concentration, and it must therefore concentrate in succession, first this, then that, then that. Whereas that consciousness, the supramental, the position is completely reversed. It is a single consciousness that holds all these. And so there is no need for diffusion or for succession. And it is one full concentration which is fully given to this and that, because it's one movement. And therefore, coming back to the text that we are at, it can embrace all in the scope of its being without being bound by any or deluded or limited. And this is one of the features of a consciousness that is infinite. It can concentrate multiply, infinitely. Unlike the human mind, because it is finite, it can only concentrate one piece at a time. And with great difficulty, perhaps we can train the skill of doing 2 or 3 things, but with partial concentration on each. But that consciousness being infinite and one indivisible, even in its infinity, holds the whole in a single action, and the whole at our experiential level might have an infinity of pieces. To each piece it gives itself wholly, because it's actually giving one whole of itself to one focus of its awareness and its action. From our perspective, it looks like each thing is getting a separate special energy and focus and attention, but actually it is one behind. And so there is this power which we would call power of multiplicity, which is natural to that state and effortless to that state, which to the mind seems to be something so extraordinary. As a part of the training of the mind, and through the training of the mind, remember the goal is always to bring to exceed mind, to attain to that which is above mind, of which the mind is an instrument. In the ancient tradition, they did many things. They trained you for multiple concentration, and the attainment of a certain status of mastery of mind was that you could do 8 things at the same time, ashtavadhanam, but 8 completely different things. Or you could even do shatavadhanam or sahasraravadhanam, so 100 things or 1,000 things, which involve playing a game of chess, composing poetry, answering questions, at the same time tracking the number of times a bell is rung randomly, and so on. If you're doing 100 things, of course, you're playing many different games of chess at the same time, doing a painting, and all of these you have to cycle through, because the body can only do one thing at a time. The mind has to hold attention on all things, although the body cycles through in circles again and again until everything is completed. Now, the skill of it is quite impressive to see. When we had a demonstration here by somebody, he was not very greatly attained, but still what he created was unusual. Afterwards, we had a lunch with him, and I went to him and I said, "What's the secret?" Of course, everybody must be asking him that. But I was trying to gain some insight into what went into his training. And I expected that he would tell me some technique or some process of developing the power of concentration. But so, do you do Nadi Shuddhi, Pranayam, this, that, or those? He said only one thing: perfect equality, samatha. I thought about it. It didn't make sense at that time to me. So again asked him, but what else? What do you do? What do you practice? He said, no, samatha, equality. And I discovered later how true that was. Because it is in this state of equality that your consciousness stands back from engagement in distinctions. And in equality, one comes closest to the status of the self as it meets the infinite possibilities of the world. And when you are based in equality, even though your awareness or your energies are engaged in activities, you are not sucked into them. And if this station of equality is then further developed, that your mind is no more in the intellect where you handle pieces, but your mind itself becomes silent and opens to a silence behind mind, the silence of the self. And I'm not saying you're in consciousness of self, you just open to that. Then from that station of equality, you can hold the whole. And while the mind is going through one thing at a time and cycling through, you are standing above and guide the mind and its concentration. Something of you remains outside and holds it all in a single vision. And then the whole movement of the Ashtavadhanam, 8 activities or more, is a single movement. And this gives you some sense of what this kind of concentration is like and why it can embrace all in the scope of its being without being bound by any or deluded or limited. So this last 2 sentences I have quickly covered so that we get the overall idea and at a level that we can also access in terms of our own experience. And the next time we will go deeper into it to study the full import of it, because he's described these 3, the waking, dream and sleep states of Brahman, in very specific descriptions. Conscious of the form of things, that's the waking state, or we withdraw into the inward activity which dwells on the play of the principles of things, play of the names and typal forms, or we soar, and this is the sleep state, soar to the condition of static inwardness where we arrive at the principles themselves and at the principle of all principles, the seed of name and form. What these are worth exploring, which we will be taking up next time, which will not be next Friday. as I will have to go out of station from next week on for almost a month. So we will continue this text on the 1st of October, which is a Friday. And until then, for those who are interested, there are some recordings of some of the lectures that I had recently at various retreats in different places. In particular, there's one on in the US, in South Carolina, on the Mother's 4 austerities and 4 liberations, where she covers the 4 tapasya of knowledge, tapasya of power, tapasya of beauty, and the tapasya of love. And so there's a series of lectures on those themes which would be of interest. And so these have been kept here in the form of DVDs, I think. So for those who are interested, you're welcome to attend. We will continue these sessions on the Fridays during the month of September and resume this text on the 1st of October. And we can pause here now and take up any questions or any comments. Yes.
When you talk to the quiet woman,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are you talking about the
So in the way Sri Aurobindo describes it here in this text, he takes just 2 things, the mind and then the supermind. Within the mind, you might discuss gradations. You can give them names, but there's still a domain where there's a division of consciousness. So right now, rather than getting lost in technical distinctions of levels, we just look at these 2 things. There's a consciousness of oneness, and then there's a consciousness of division. And they are coterminous. Within us, there are parts which open to this consciousness of oneness, and then there are parts which are in the consciousness of division in different degrees. Just a partial division, increasing division, and then the area where we are most conscious is the surface mind, where we're handling small pieces. Yes, there is of course a continuity, but still there is a point of transition where there's no division at all. And Sri Aurobindo focuses on these 2 broadly, rather than looking at intermediate stages. When it comes to actually ascending through to that consciousness of oneness, we can discuss degrees of its of the contact with it. Let me put it this way. The first point of contact where you will experience something of this oneness, partially, but still something of this oneness, is what we call the intuitive consciousness. And the intuition is the supermind, but in a finite glimpse, a ray, a brief contact. So what I discussed earlier, something of the mind turns in concentration to solve the problem. Briefly we touch and we have that experience. That's intuition, right? And if we dwelt on it, not a brief touch, but remained on it and glimpsed something wide, more complete, more free, or from there saw a vision of the whole, but from a perspective that you would call overmind. But from the same poise, if you held the wholeness and embraced the whole from that, you would call that supermind. So rather than thinking of it as levels you have to cross to this level and then that level and then that level is a long journey, just above mind is something which touches the supramental consciousness, the consciousness of oneness. How we touch it, how we engage with it, the degree to which we know it is your experience of degrees. So we don't worry about that at all now. And when seen in this way, this consciousness, which the concentration allows us to touch, is right here. It's not far away, it's accessible to us. It's just a question of how much we will develop in our access to it, the degrees of its unfoldment of its potential. We don't worry about that at all. We can make a contact with it. We can experience it. And it's the culmination of any concentration taken to its full possibility.
So what is our effort in trying to reach there? Is intensity or aspiration?
It's concentration. The whole focus here in this chapter is concentration. Aspiration will help you to gather your concentration. It will give the direction to the concentration. It will give you the recognition that you're approaching that on which you're concentrating. But the aspiration itself must be like the flame point, gathering all the rays to a single point, cutting through. So the power of concentration is the key, which allows us to make that breakthrough, cut through the limits of the mind and open to that which is above mind. Yes.
In layman's terms, when we talk about increasing grades of IQ, what is the relation with?
Yes. Okay.
That they say that the genius is where the center of the Godhead. So, how does that?
Yes.
Is high IQ always the center of the Godhead, or is sometimes it's only more convolution?
Yes, it's an interesting question. When we look at this question from the perspective of IQ, the intelligence measure, so there is a whole system by which you are given a certain number for your intelligence, average being somewhere around 100. If you're able to do so many types of problems within certain given time, then you're 110. If you do more, you're 120, and so on. But if you consider what's being measured in the nature of the IQ tests, are problems that involve abstraction of the mind. So you're given, for example, a pattern. 1, 2, 4, 8. What's the next number? If you see what the mind has to do, it has to go behind the appearance of the chain. There's an abstraction, and you have to sense where that abstraction, how that abstraction articulates itself in this chain. Now, if I give the same thing, 1, 2, 4, 8, and the next one, I don't go 16, I go 12. It's a completely different chain, and you'd start wondering, I expected 16 because it's supposed to be doubling but it's not doubling. What is it? And if you observe what you're doing in your mind, you're concentrating intensely. There's nothing you can do. You can try out numbers, but you still don't have conviction. You don't have the insight. You concentrate your mind, and at some point suddenly click, this is what it is. And you see the pattern, right? What did you do, which was a measure of your IQ, was the power of your concentration to ascend above the sensory pattern to something which was more essential as an idea or concept. And then from there come back to complete this pattern. So another series of kinds of questions you'll find in the IQ test. This is similar to this. That is similar to what? So you're not only seeing one chain, you're seeing a completely different chain, but you have somehow to transpose this. This is going one meta level above of abstraction. And so all the nature of the questions for IQ tests are questions which require your mind to rise above the obvious and to see at a more essential level of idea concept. And it's really what we're describing here. The concentration needed to cut through using the, at first, thought, form, and name as keys, but then penetrating through idea to the idea and beyond the idea to something which gives you the knowledge. So now, some people are able to push it to a certain degree easily. That's why there's a time limit. Of course, if you sat long enough, in 10 days you might solve all the problems, or some might not at all. So it's already a measure that you can access some level of abstraction where the mind approaches something which is not mind, which is intuitive, but also that you can do it easily enough and then articulate it, and that's your measure of the intelligence. But what happens is after a certain point, you cannot measure anymore by these kinds of methods. So after you cross 150, there are people, we claim, IQ measure of 200. But you can't do these tests. The nature of those tests involves something creative of problems. Often these are mathematical problems because that's in the domain of mind, most abstract. Problems where we don't know solutions. And you're asked to be creative in how you approach the thing itself and draw insights which have not been drawn before. Things like that, which are almost at a level which is intuitive. You're asked, even in those tests, you're asked to watch numbers and anticipate what the number will be next. So it's a kind of a precognition. It becomes almost in the domain of what we could call powers of telepathy and premonition that are being tested, which represent the further degree of IQ. So in the way the intelligence is measured, finally what you're trying to see is your access to higher gradations of consciousness. And pure genius is the ability precisely to tap into this intuition and draw something, an insight, quickly, directly, spontaneously even, which changes the whole picture. You see now completely from a different view.
Isn't the divine scheme of things that the divine has chosen certain people for the center of the Godhead to move the human race forward?
So we would not say that the divine has chosen a few people for this. Rather, we will say some people have evolved to this capacity, and in principle, all of us can develop to this. Because in all of us, these gradations of consciousness already pre-exist. Just because we are closed to them, we are not able to access them. But by a process of training, we can actually develop the capacity to access these levels. And the training essentially is developing the power of concentration, and by power of concentration, ascending these levels. Now, how it is to be done is actually going to be the discussion of the last 4 paragraphs of this chapter. What is the kind of concentration practice, etc. By taking up these kinds of practices, we can actually develop our genius potential. And it is available to all human beings without exception. What will vary though, if somebody has only developed very rudimentary sensory mental skills, then getting to the highest genius potential will not be easy, will take a long time. But he will still be able to move in that direction quite a bit with reasonable pace. If someone who has already developed those levels will be able to go further, and so on. So you have the variations among people. But the idea that you can get to it, and it's possible for all, that we have to recognize.
It's not like one's innately born with.
No. You are not limited to any binding of births. In fact, what happens is with the action of the yoga, this process is so tremendously accelerated that even somebody who is born with very low development of mind can rapidly open to these dimensions and develop these capacities. Sri Aurobindo has several letters pointing to individuals in the ashram in whom there was no potential for higher intelligence in the normal sense, who had no background. They came fully formed in a very narrow, limited sense mind. And suddenly, after coming here, within 1 year, they are spouting poetry and extraordinary art and literature and things like that. And he says that kind of progress cannot be done normal human way. It is the result of the yoga force. And there's another letter where he says that the true intelligence comes not by mental activity, but by development of the intuition and by the psychic opening. If you think about it, it is this power of intuition which is the essence of the intelligence, and the psychic opening which brings into it the purity of discrimination. Because even when you have an intuition, at first, because the mind is not trained, it is heavily mixed with your preconceptions. And to be able to sift out and separate the pure intuition from the distortions you have introduced by habit, it needs that psychic influence. It is by these two things, he says, that the true intelligence is developed. And the truth of it we can understand. Yes.
You are telling us about how it is possible to concentrate on more than one subject or problem or issue by maintaining a state of what you describe as equality. Now, I'll just give you an example which is somewhat akin to something which I do sometimes. I am listening to European classical poetry, a new composition in a familiar, formal language. Say some unknown 19th century composer who was very great in his day, but he did not get revival in the last 10 years. So I'm trying to understand the form of the of a movement. At the same time, I am trying to construct an Excel-based model of a business process. Now, these two things
Yes.
require different mental and psychological
Correct.
faculties at work. Now, with this profound difference in the mental and psychological faculties for to be applied to task A as against task B, how does one maintain equality, and what does equality really mean in this in this ocean of diversity?
So the description is of one side developing a certain understanding of music and appreciation, and the other side developing a business model, technical, mathematical, etc. So the thing you notice, both of these involve abstraction of the mind. Okay? The limitation in both fields will be if you bias yourself to exaggerate one thing and not see the full picture. Or if you make the error of thinking that this particular thing will solve that problem when in fact it's something else which is related to that. You use the wrong formula in your Excel. Okay? Or you are able to see only this and are not able to see the whole picture. These are three distortions which will happen. You'll see here being bound, deluded, or limited. Okay? To fully appreciate that music, you must have as if the backdrop of all the possibilities of the music and how this gathers out of that infinite possibility, this particular focus. Similarly, with your business plan, you have to have a big picture of all the flow of resources involved and the patterns and their interconnections and interdependencies. And then out of that, for your purpose, for this immediate focus, this is the pattern that you highlight and focus. If your picture is not complete, you see only partially, you have knocked out this whole part. As you move into your action in the business, you find halfway down, oh my God, I did not take into account the fact that there's going to be currency fluctuation. Now my whole model breaks apart. So you must have had the full picture to begin with. Then you have factored in all those things. So second, you cannot be biased. Because I personally like this, I give it more importance, I neglect the other things. Because I personally think that the world is in a very good state in terms of financial systems, so currency fluctuation will not be more than 2%. That's a bias you have. It can happen tomorrow, there's a massive crash. Fluctuations which are outside the control even of governments. Governments might collapse. And you should be able to include that in your full picture. And then the delusion that if I get enough loan, I will be able to solve this problem. The problem will not be solved by loan, it will be solved by the quality of people you have. So you've misplaced one thing by another, and that's the delusion. So if you take care of these three kinds of distortions, you will have a true picture. And then comes the skill, not only the insight, but the ability to articulate, to give form, to give shape. So a lot of the intelligence training is not only rising above, but then being able to articulate and bring into clear expression. Give form to something which is held at first in an abstract level. I know what I want to say, but I don't have the words to say it. Then you don't express the intelligence. You have it, but you can't articulate it. So that also is the other part. Having seen this, move it into a meaningful, objective business plan. Now, if you see, this is exactly what you're doing in essence when you observe and appreciate the music. Except here, you are not creating it. You are seeing the full play of possibilities, and then this particular form of the music expression and seeing it in its place. And to enjoy it, you have the full free relationship with all possibilities. And then perhaps you may even begin to find insights. This music is distinctive because of these features. Those insights will begin to come. You'll be able to articulate even. But if you see the nature of the faculties used and the way the concentration is held, it's almost similar. But the base of it is this standing back to be equal to all things. And then seeing things in their true and right relation. And then from there moving to arrange and to articulate or to act upon it. So this is the base. The power of concentration gives you the insight. The equality gives you the completeness and prevents the distortion.
what about the difficulty of maintaining total recall when you switch back from A to B and from B to
Yes.
A? Is that not part and parcel of the requirement of
Right.
quality and concentration?
Yes. So the recall happens if you enter into the activity fully.
Forget where you left it off.
Correct. So when you enter with your mind in the activity, and from within the activity you switch to the other, it is disorienting. And the memories are different, the actions are different. But if having entered the activity, instead of switching, you come back to the center, and then pivot from here. See, the pivot of the center never moves. It can turn all around 360 degrees, but the center never actually moves. So you come back to the center and then turn to the music, and you see now from the big picture, and then you move into it. Again, when you have to switch, you come back to center, pivot, move. And at some point, even the pivot will become not necessary. It will be you're holding both. You just move in, but you always have the same center.
But what is meant by actually coming back to the center?
So, okay. Coming back to the center is disengaging your mind and your energies from involvement in the thing itself, and standing back from it, separating yourself from it and seeing it as if from a distance. Okay? So when you're in the activity, very often you're lost in the specifics of that moment. You even forget why you're doing it. When you come back, you're seeing the big picture. Why am I doing this? What is the immediate priority? What is the later priority? So it's the station of the mind to be involved into the details or to be disengaging to look at the big picture and standing back from it, uninvolved personally. This is the coming back to the center. Now the center itself, there are degrees. I can come out, but there's still a level of attachment and personal involvement. This is my baby, my project. I can step back one more and say, this is equivalent to all other projects. This just happens to be my responsibility. But my engagement with it is just as impersonal as it is for the others, which now others have to handle. So you can come back and go all the way as far as you can to personal detachment and an equality which is as inclusive as possible to all things in the universe. That would be the center.
Does that imply that when you do this, no difficulty in that task, however great, can bother you?
Exactly.
And it can, so therefore it will be easier to go back to the other one with equally full.
Yes. Nothing will bother you personally. You'll still be aware of the problems. When you step back like this, it will not bother you personally. And you are free of it, therefore you can turn attention to the next thing and not be burdened, not be carrying it with you in this way. Yes. But this capacity to withdraw and step back fully must be developed. And this is what happens in certain kinds of meditation practice. That's why it's useful to practice this poise of detachment, standing back, viewing the whole universe as one big whole, one presence of the divine, or one canvas on which the whole thing is played out with no personal engagement, standing back completely detached, and then re-entering and going back and forth and detaching. You must practice this. Then the skill is now available in the midst of activity.
When we're talking about concentration, are we talking about the evolution of the mind? Then what happens to the evolution of the writer? Can a person evolve in this direction, become a genius, but his writer is still
Yes.
chaotic?
So, yes, if we could develop the genius potential in the mind, but the rest of our human nature might still remain what it was, semi-animal. So the goal here is obviously not simply developing the power of concentration to develop our genius potential. That also would happen incidentally. The goal here is to bring the focus of the mind's concentration to acquire identity with the self. But the self itself is not just in the mind, but in all the levels of being. All the whole cosmos is self. So we use the mind as a first point of contact. Once that contact begins, then we have to bring in the heart, bring in our senses, bring in our actions into that contact. And that's how eventually the whole of our being is taken up in the change of consciousness. Right now, the whole discussion is more on the focus of the mind to get to that first point. Later, we will have to draw in the rest, which is actually discussed in other chapters subsequently.
That's why.
Yes, yes. It's yoga of integral knowledge is this section of the book. It's not yet the full integral yoga. It's the yoga of integral knowledge where through the path of knowledge, we are already opening up to an integral experience. Later in the integral yoga, this will be one of three broad support structures, so pillars, so to say, of the overall yoga process.
Meditation helps concentration, or concentration helps meditation.
Okay, interesting. Does meditation help concentration or concentration help meditation? It depends what you mean by meditation. There are two words, meditation and contemplation. So in the way people use it, sometimes they exchange the meaning. Some people consider meditation to be a state of holding attention. Some people consider it a state of wandering thoughts around the center. Contemplation similarly is the other, and that depends on where you are in the world. But in either case, both involve a kind of concentration, and the success of the meditation or the contemplation is in the power of your concentration. On the other hand, in the very activity of meditation or contemplation, you are exercising your power of concentration and so developing it. So we will put it this way: meditation, the concentration power is what will make your meditation or contemplation successful, and is developed by the exercise of it during the meditation and contemplation on anything, even if it is a mundane problem of the world. So I may be reading a book. If I can do it with full concentration, then I'm developing my power of concentration. That same power of concentration which I will use when I concentrate on the presence of the divine, or the idea of the infinity of the divine, or on the love of the divine or for the divine, or the consecration of my actions in service to the divine. So the concentration is a common feature in all the activities, and during the specialized meditation, it is utilized more strongly, and it is the vehicle by which that meditation will be successful. Swami Vivekananda makes a very interesting observation about the education. He says, if I had to do my education all over again, I would not waste time in learning subjects. I would first develop my power of concentration and the detachment, equality. And having perfected both, I could learn any subject at will. So you see how these two powers, and that was our discussion earlier, these two powers are at the heart of any complete knowledge, or access to, or breakthrough in, or mastery of any field of knowledge or skill. The concentration will take you through, the equality will give you the completeness and prevent the distortion. These two together, you can master anything, learn anything, and attain, of course, to that knowledge, which is the knowledge of all, a knowledge of self, which is the highest objective in this case. But equally, you could apply it to any level. I have also repeated this many times, the example the mother gives in response to a question: how long does it take to attain self-realization? And the mother answers by quoting Ramakrishna Paramahans. She says, Ramakrishna Paramahansa says, if you have a weak power of concentration, then it will take you 3 days. If your power of concentration is a little developed, it will take you 3 hours. And if it is well developed, it will take you 3 minutes. And Ramakrishna, when he gave this answer, he demonstrated this. He said, see, and then he went into concentration, and in 3 minutes he attained to the self. So, Swami Vivekananda goes so far as to say, it is the power of concentration in which you see the value of a man. This is the worth of a human being, is in his power of concentration. Because finally, that's the one thing which will get you to whatever it is that you want to do or you're capable of doing. Otherwise, everything remains potential, partial, unexpressed, unrealized. Yes.
Your concentration, you can concentrate perfectly for 10, 15 minutes.
Yes.
Then something which
Yes.
is said on earth, triggers to develop you for a
Yes. So it will happen that you're concentrated on an activity, there's some disturbance, your mind turns to that, and then it's lost and wanders away. So remember the two powers, detachment and concentration. Okay, they will help each other. So first thing you notice, when you are involved in concentration, very often the mind is not fully in a focus. It is a part of the mind involved, and the rest of the mind is kind of anyway loose, wandering. So the first thing you do is you consciously pull all the threads of your awareness, bring them together on that one point. When this is completely done, you will actually not hear the other disturbances. Or even if you hear, it will not pull. It's because some threads of my awareness are scattered around like that. They get pulled by the other sound and my attention shifts. So first thing, bring all the threads of awareness to the center and then direct them to this focus. And hold the focus as long as you can. After a while, initially you will tire. You pause. Give rest. Dwell on what you have read, studied, thought about. Come back to that station of equality, standing back, observing, detached. And then re-enter again. And you go through this process. What happens is after a while, even though you're fully involved, at the back something remains detached. So even when the distraction comes, you may register it, but something being in that station says, but my focus is here now. And if necessary, briefly it can turn and say, wait, I'll get back to you in 10 minutes, and you get back, and you have not lost your concentration. So skill, in developing the skill, first, center yourself, bring all the threads of attention, and then go to it. And use the time in between, pauses to step back, detach, rest in the detachment, and then move back to concentration. By exercise, the power of concentration will grow. This principle you can apply to meditation or to any work. In meditation, you would turn that concentration to some idea of the divine or some particular aspect of your relationship with the divine. I am a child of the divine. Or turn to the feeling of love for the divine. Or dwell on, meditate on the theme of infinity or eternity, whatever. But it will be exactly the same power you will use in your daily activities. And exactly the same process. Gather all the threads back and then turn to the object of concentration. Yes.
Is there any connection or correlation between purity of the instrument and
Yes.
higher consciousness?
Yes, very much. Your question actually catches our theme of the discussion of the previous chapter and this one. The previous chapter was called The Purified Understanding. This chapter is concentration. And Sri Aurobindo discusses that the two are complementary. When the mind is purified of agitation, of mixture of emotions, mixtures of the senses, then it is free to be able to concentrate better. On the other hand, it is by concentration of the mind that it separates itself from the emotions and the mixtures of other parts, and so leads to purification. So as the power of concentration develops, you can purify more easily. As there is greater purification of the mind, the power of concentration develops more. By purification here, of course, we mean the mind to be able to function as it wishes, in its freedom, in its stillness, without mixture of other things. But in its highest sense, purification is when the mind follows its own dharma, follows its own innate nature, but also responds only to the divine in its unique way. But that's not part of the discussion here. It is. So in practice, there are two activities which will help to develop the powers of the mind generally, including the power of concentration. A physical exercise called Nadi Shuddhi, purifies the nerve channels. It involves this alternate nostril breathing. And another exercise called Chitta Shuddhi, which is purifying the substance of the mind by stilling it, silencing it. Silencing the mind and purifying the nerve channels of the mind. These are the two activities which will release the mind's potential and greatly amplify all its faculties, including the power of concentration, through which you will develop all other faculties and so on. So it's like one of those fundamental things. You get this and all the rest becomes easy. Train your mind to become silent at will and learn to direct your mind, gather threads, focus at will. This exercise, physical exercise, will remove from the mind a lot of the junk, but you could do it by a psychological process equally. So we will pause here now and continue this text after a month. We can even put this into practice, whatever we have discussed. Bring the threads of awareness into the center. As we chant Om, we hold the center, hold the focus, hold the sense of what Om means for us, the vibration of the divine on all levels of the cosmos, and just turn ourselves in a kind of a one-pointedness to the divine as we chant Om 5 times. Oh.